Recent attempts by mainstream media such as the BBC and Channel 4 have claimed to accurately portray significant political events from previous decades. Some content is factual, but much of it is inaccurate and deceptive. This documentary style can be used as a subtle form of propaganda to present a one-sided narrative that aims to mislead. Selective misreporting of history can indeed deceive the public about real political events. What you're about to see refutes much of what we are told is fair and balanced reporting of British political history.
Hello, I'm Martin Webster. I was National Activities Organiser for the National Front when that party was on the boil between 1969 and 1983. Welcome to the first edition of Front View. I was attending Charing Cross Hospital, which, despite its name, is in Hammersmith, for my annual echo test on my heart. They keep a check on that for me. And I stopped off in the main course of the building as I was early to have a cup of coffee. And there, arrayed before me on the walls around the cafeteria, were photographs of an event which I partly organised. That's to say, the nationalist side of things I organised in 1977. And it was the march, the anti-mugging march, which the National Front held in Lewisham on Saturday the 13th of August 1977, which this exhibition was all about. There were various photographs, mainly of left-wing and multiracial anti-National Front people on the walls, with captions written by the photographer or people with whom he is associated. And the staggering thing that hit me first of all was, how is it possible in a National Health Service property, which is surely a hospital, is somewhere out and away and above politics, how was such a political and controversial exhibition allowed to be shown in such a place? And I read the captions of the pictures around the hallway, and the device which the people who'd organised this exhibition had used for trying to slip under the regulations was to suggest that the activities against the National Front in the lead up to and during the Lewisham Anti-Muggers March by the NF was organised by a group called Rock Against Racism, which is a cultural group. And I realised that the reason why the organisers of this exhibition had tried to portray all these activities as being held by Rock Against Racism, a so-called cultural group, was because the exhibition was organised by the charity associated with the Imperial College NHS Welfare Health Trust. And under Charity Commission regulations, certain proprietors have to be organised, and that charities shouldn't be partisan, party political in their approach. And therefore, they'd, in their captions, completely misled the general public of today about the event, in order to try and keep themselves legal. Well, this is an issue which I, with the advice of friends of mine from that period, including in particular Philip Geoghegan, who is website manager of angloceltic.org, we will be approaching both the National Imperial College Healthcare Trust and this subunit of the trust, this charity organisation, to put to them the fact that this is an unlawful display and it contains severe untruths. I might mention that after I'd had my cup of coffee, and then a little bit later went upstairs to have my echo test, the technician who was taking the test remarked that my blood pressure was a little bit raised. I don't think it was the coffee. I think it was the exhibition that exercised me so much, and of course it brought back a flood of memories, which during the course of this discussion I will rehearse with you. I think it's necessary when we deal with what actually went on at Lewisham, was to go back a little bit into my past, my connection with that neighbourhood. In 1963 or 64, I can't now exactly remember, I was badly beaten up by a Jewish terrorist organisation called the 62 Group in Kensington High Street. And I was hospitalised briefly. And then a good friend of the nationalist movement, Dr. W.J. Mitchell, who had a general practice in New Cross, in Queen's Road, New Cross, said, well, you've lost your job because of this incident. Come and work for me as a caretaker at my GP practice so that you can stage a recovery from the injuries that you'd received. I was very grateful for this offer, and I lived at 387 Queen's Road, New Cross. It's no longer a GP surgery, for the best part of a year, I guess. And during this period, when I opened the surgery to patients first thing in the morning, it was quite frequent to see dear old girls in their late 60s and 70s, even 80s, coming in wearing their aprons and their carpet slippers the way old ladies used to do in Cockney areas in those days. They don't do it now, but it was quite common for elderly ladies to go about the street in their immediate neighbourhood in carpet slippers and aprons, and they used to come into the surgery black and blue, and some of them had hideous green bruises on themselves. This didn't happen every day, but it certainly happened every other week, that old girls would present themselves at Dr. Mitchell's surgery, having been discharged from hospital, where they were taken after they'd been attacked. And what was going on at that time is very few of these elderly ladies had bank accounts, so they used to collect their pensions in cash from the post office. Now, the muggers who were in that area wholly of the West Indian community, young blacks, knew that the old girls would collect their pension. I think they collected their pensions every fortnight. And they knew which old ladies were going where, what their route was, and they would pick them off like wolves and give them a beating and the old girls would fight to try and hold on to their handbag, to hold on to their pensions, which were paid in cash because these folk didn't have bank accounts. And that's the reason why they were made subjects of these predatory attacks by gangs of black muggers. And they used to present themselves at Dr. Mitchell's surgery, still black and blue, and some of the bruises, as I say, produced an awful shade of green. And I was horrified to think that elderly ladies were being preyed on like this. This is the surgery in Queen's Road, New Cross, where Dr. William Mitchell had his practice, and where I, for a short period, worked for him as the caretaker. And it was here that I would open the door often to ladies still dressed in their aprons and wearing their slippers, who the day before had been attacked when collecting their pensions in cash from local post offices, and they were waylaid by gangs of West Indian muggers who beat them unmercifully. And when they came in, even after having been At the surgery in the hospital, they would come here covered in bruises for further treatment from Dr. Mitchell. And it was most distressing to see them coming through the door in the state that they were in. And the police at that time were making a real effort to clamp down on the muggers, and did so for quite some time. Anyway, in due course, I left Dr. Mitchell's care because I had a demonstration against the Mau Mau leader Jomo Kenyatta to attend to. And then I ended up in Brixton Prison for 40 days as a result of that activity. But that's another story. However, I held the memory of what was happening to our elderly white womenfolk in New Cross in the back of my mind. And then later, when I became National Activities Organiser of the National Front in 1969 and through the 1970s, I took note of the arrests that the police were then prepared to make against black muggers in Lewisham, in New Cross Gate, in Deptford, in that part of London, that took the heaviest belting in the Blitz during the war. And these are the old ladies who saw us through the Blitz. And this is how they were rewarded, being surrounded by vicious, predatory black muggers to rob them of their pitiful pensions. And I thought that this was, in 1977, an opportunity for the nationalist movement to show support for these people and to demand even sterner actions against the muggers. And ahead of our decision to hold this anti-muggers march, in I think June of that year, we held the march in August, in June of this year, I think a dozen or a score of these black muggers were up before magistrates in the New Cross area, all charged with mugging offences against old ladies. And the Socialist Workers' Party, it may then have still been called the International Socialists, but it soon became the Socialist Workers' Party, a Trotskyite communist group, were holding a demonstration outside the court, of course denouncing the police as fascist police and arresting black muggers who attacked white ladies exclusively, attacking the police as racists, not the muggers as racists. And who should turn up out of the blue while this demonstration outside the magistrates' court was going on than the person who is now our king, Charles III, but who then was Prince Charles, Prince of Wales. And he went over to them and, according to press reports, said, "Oh, what's all the din about?" And there are photographs, or at least one particular photograph of him talking to the leader of the Socialist Workers' Party group outside the court, a man called Kim Gordon. Now, Kim Gordon is a Chinese Negro. His parents, or his father, went out to China in order to support and work for Mao Zedong's genocidal communist government, and worked there for many years. Presumably he met this Chinese lady. They partnered up and produced Kim Gordon, who, when they decided to come back or come to the United Kingdom to settle, they brought Kim Gordon with them. And there he was, large as life, as leader of the Socialist Workers' Party's black section called Flame. And there's this pitiful photograph of Charles talking to Kim Gordon, with Charles with this anguished, oh so sympathetic expression on his face, and standing between them was a man with a most sad absolutely desolate look on his face. He was the local district commander of the Metropolitan Police in that area, who, with his officers, had been working hard to try and protect our elderly womenfolk from these mugging attacks. Whereas while Prince Charles, who was there protecting and escorting, was chatting away to the representative of the man who was defending the muggers. You couldn't describe it as ridiculous. I think obscene would be the proper description for our future king to be hobnobbing with the champion of black muggers of our white elderly womenfolk. And this incident, and I'll show you photographs of this that you can use with the documentary of the Charles Kim Gordon interview. And this further increased our resolve to have this demonstration there. And of course, during as it transpired, the blacks and the people speaking for the blacks, and of course the mass media, the BBC, said, "Oh, having a demonstration, anti-mugging demonstration in this area, it's so full of black, it's a provocation." What about the provocation caused to white people, whose country this is, having their elderly womenfolk attacked by gangs of black wolves after their handbags, after they've collected their pension? It is breathtaking, the propaganda that was used to try and stop us. But we weren't stopped, and at the instigation of an organisation called the Board of Deputies of British Jews, this organisation had a defence committee, and the body then, I think, was run by a man called Martin Savitt. The presiding officer of the body, I think, was probably was Greville Janner. And the Board of Deputies of British Jews formed a convenience organisation called the All Lewisham Campaign Against Racialism and Fascism, Al-Karaf. And that was the organisation which, at least nominally, was responsible for organising the opposition to the National Front March against the muggers. And the members, the constituent organisations of Al-Karaf were the Labour Party, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, the Communist Party, and the Socialist Workers' Party. Amongst the people on the parade were Martin Savitt and a well-known bishop of the Church of England, who was an open member of the Communist Party. And they pleaded with the police to have our march banned. And in London, as different from boroughs in everywhere else in England, the person who has the initiative to initiate a ban by the Home Secretary of an event under the Public Order Act is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police. He doesn't have to liaise as police chief constables have to do elsewhere in the country with the local authority. He can initiate it himself and go straight to the Home Secretary and recommend that a march be banned because of its threat to public order. But the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police and one of his deputies, who was in charge of public order issues, Assistant Commissioner Helm, Helm, didn't feel that our march against the muggers in Lewisham was an improper march on an improper subject, and they were not disposed to request the Home Secretary to ban it under the terms of the Public Order Act. So Alcaraf got a left-wing lawyer to help them launch an action before the High Court for an order, I think it was called an order for mandamus, against the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, which would in fact instruct him to apply his powers that were open to him under the Public Order Act to ban our march. Now the Commissioner, to his great credit, with the support of Commander Helm, actively resisted this application. They didn't kowtow to the Reds the way police officers do, senior police officers do nowadays. They fought the case, and what is more, they won their case, that the Commissioner has at his own absolute discretion the right to recommend, and that the courts didn't have the right to upend a well-established public order procedure. So then the Alcaraf mobilised its troops from all over the country, and to show their provocative and aggressive and indeed violent attempt, they organised their march to start an hour, 2 hours before we were due to start our march from a location in New Cross called Clifton Rise. And they organised their march to end at Clifton Rise in order, as they said in a press statement, and I quote them, in order to greet the National Front marches. In other words, in order to stage a biff-up. Well, I was in contact with the police on a regular basis. They regularly summoned me to Scotland Yard for discussions about what we were going to do and what we were not going to do on this march. And on the Thursday before the Saturday the 13th, I was summoned to the 6th floor of the then Scotland Yard, it's elsewhere now, and had an interview with Commander Helm. He'd obviously had a very good lunch. And he said to me, now look, we're going to allow this march to go ahead, Mr. Webster, but do my boys have to have eyes in the back of their head? We know who we've got to watch out for. We know where the trouble is coming from, but do we have to keep eyes in the back of our heads for you people reciprocating the trouble? In which case my boys are in severe trouble. And I told him that any lawful instruction which the police gave me would be abided by. Our purpose was to have our demonstration and to get publicity for what was going on in Lewisham. And it was not our purpose to involve ourselves, if we could help it, in violence, or to involve the police in violence. He said, in that case, Mr. Webster, on the basis of you giving your word about that, the march goes ahead. So we did assemble. Quite a few of our people were waylaid and attacked. Yeah. I can go through this with you by showing you documentation. I mean, there's one particular incident in, I think, the Sunday Mirror. There's a picture of an old lady sprawled at the side, and the caption they gave it was to the effect that this woman had been assaulted by National Front rioters. It turns out that the picture of the woman was a woman called Esther Sizer, a member of the Camden branch of the National Front, who was going to the march, and she was in her 70s, but she was going to the march and was attacked by the they later became the Anti-Nazi League, but the Socialist Workers' Party, communist scum of one kind or another, and sent her flying into the gutter. And that's where the Daily Mirror got their picture, and they told a deliberate lie about that. And we confronted them with that lie, and they never made any response whatsoever. But reporting of the events which took place there are very interesting, particularly a section of the Sunday Times, very extensive report the day afterwards, saying that the demands by the Al-Kharaf, the communists and the Trotskyites, to have our march banned because we were marching through an area which was a black people's area. Mm-hmm. Yep. Was a nonsense, because very shortly before the march, a National Front candidate and a candidate from a National Front splinter group unfortunately fought a by-election where their combined vote was greater than the other political party candidates, but because the nationalist vote was split by this splinter group, the National Front candidate didn't get elected. But nonetheless, the vote showed that the nationalist cause, the National Front in particular, had a very, very strong basis of support living in the Clifton Rise area, in which fell within that ward. And therefore the pretension by the propagandists then and now, as at the Charing Cross Hospital exhibition, that we had no right to be there. Yep. That was the implication of it. Is not only untrue, it's the reverse of the truth. Well, they do. And that's a matter of record, which of course the Sunday Times mentioned it deep down in the body copy. But in all reviews of the Lewisham March since then, that fact, it's very important political fact, is not mentioned. No. Democracy is swept aside by these people. The upshot of the Lewisham March was predictable. Most of the press were aghast that such a disturbance could, because it was a tremendous riot on the street. The march, the National Front march, was waylaid at every step of the way through the Deptford and Lewisham, New Cross area. In several places, as Commander Helm remarks in his interview later with the Jewish Chronicle, had to be altered. And we can get on to his Jewish Chronicle interview, which is most important, at a later stage in this discussion. But I was given a sight helmet by one of our members who was a building worker, because bricks were coming over. The Reds were using a technique which they'd learned from their IRA friends in Northern Ireland. They call it the bogside mortar, whereby you get a plank and you put bricks on one end of the plank, and then you get one or two people to jump onto the plank, and it projects a brick over a crowd lining a street and onto marchers. And I've got the helmet down the corridor. I'll show you in it. You can cut in a picture of it, and it shows. I just put on that helmet when this guy had given it to me, and turned around to attend to some detail, getting our march on the go, when a brick hit and split the helmet. Now, if I hadn't been wearing a helmet, I would probably be dead. And as I say, I'll show you the helmet. I made a remark about this in a report which I gave to the Public Order Committee of the House of Commons some months later, which is perhaps a document we can come to at another time. But the National Front endured, as did the police, tremendous attacks. And for the first time in England, the police were subject to attacks by the socialist workers and these other people, with attacks with ammonia. Now, ammonia can blind. And they were using that for the first time. Again, another trick they'd learned from their IRA allies in Northern Ireland. This was the calibre of people. No National Front members were arrested on that day that I can recollect at all. And certainly none of them arrested for carrying a weapon like that, let alone bottles of ammonia to throw at the opposition or to throw at the police. And it's at that particular point that I think that we might discuss the interview which a week later Commander Helm gave to the Jewish Chronicle. You can cut it into this video. Yeah. But he said, you only get trouble when the National Front's opponents turn up.
Yes, yes. I'm going to close in on that, Captain.
Oh, yes, and I've emphasised that point. And she put to him, but isn't a march by the National Front through an area with lots of coloured immigrants a provocation in and of itself? And he said, no, no. In a democracy, people are expected to be confronted by, or at least to see, expressions and manifestations of other people's points of view. That is what democracy is all about. The idea that white people in England, whose country this is, cannot march through any part of this country because alien incomers have set up residence in there, is itself a form of racism. Anti-white racism. That white people don't have freedom of speech, freedom to manifest their opinions in any part of their own country. That's the implication of all of this. And I have to say that the police, and there's one policeman I intend to mention, I don't know whether he's alive now, but there was one policeman I regularly used to see at Scotland Yard, including the old Scotland Yard that used to be just off Whitehall, George Garnham, Sergeant George Garnham, who was in charge of demonstrations having to do with anything connected to the cenotaph in Whitehall. And as you know, the National Front had an annual cenotaph parade during the afternoon of Remembrance Sunday every year. And so I got to know him through liaising with him year after year, getting those events organised. And he, whether he volunteered to do it, I don't know, he's a great big, huge, burly man, put himself at the very head of the police contingent, which was in front of the National Front March. He put himself at the very tip point of that. And where crowds tried to obstruct our march, he just went biff, bang, wallop, and it enthused the other policemen behind him, and they surged through. And this was the spirit. Sergeant Garnham, I learned later, wasn't a racist as he would be depicted, because I am told by colleagues of his that his wife is in fact Pakistani. Mm-hmm. But he was an old-fashioned copper who people like Dixon of Dock Green would recognise. Right. He wasn't involved in politics. He wasn't going to show preference for politics. In fact, like every police officer has to do in Britain, you have to swear an oath, not only of loyalty to the monarch and their heirs and successors according to law, but not to show any fear or favour or malice, and to show malice towards none. Right. Yep. And he was shocked that people should try and stop a lawful exercise in free speech, just as his bosses were, who fought the communists at the High Court only a couple of weeks before. Yep. They did the biff bang wallop in legal terms at the High Court for free speech. And George Garnham at the very front, and if you see films of the march, there he is with the old beanie hat on with a strap underneath his chin, which officers didn't normally do, but to keep your helmet on in a riot you need to do that, clumping his way through these riots. And he must have chinned quite a few of them, and this was the attitude which we had from the police then. They weren't pro-us. They weren't pro-National Front. I myself have been arrested several times, and I don't complain about it. It's part of the rough and tumble of politics outside the establishment, that in order to get attention for your cause, you have to kick over the traces a little bit, and I don't complain when I had my collar felt. But I knew that the officers then operating were on the side of free speech, and also keen to maintain their own power. They didn't want to have courts and politicians dictating to them how they should conduct their duty. The law exists, and they will obey the law, and they will enforce the law. That was their attitude. You don't have that attitude now. And I remember this was the attitude of the police. There was a special branch officer, Sergeant Ian Bryan, who I met in '74 when we were having various, beginning with public order problems, and I was discussing with him what was necessary for us to hold marches. And he said, don't you worry about that. If we decide, the Commissioner decides, that what you're going to do is going to be provocative, gratuitously provocative, and cause an unnecessary disturbance to public order, then we will ban it. And we will enforce that ban and nick the lot of you should you try and oppose the ban. On the other hand, he said, we will mobilise every policeman throughout the United Kingdom, if necessary, to uphold your or anybody else's right to hold a lawful march if it's confronted by violence. Otherwise, we don't have a democracy. And that's a sergeant in Special Branch is quite a senior person in the police establishment. I don't think they have constables in Special Branch, or they didn't. And they all seem to be at least sergeant. And that's what he told me, that the police would mobilise every police officer throughout the kingdom to uphold the right. If they decided a march was lawful and could take place, if people tried unlawful tactics to thwart that, then they would have the entire complement, the entire constabulary of the United Kingdom arraigned against them. That was the attitude the police had then. Contrast with what's going on now. These are some of the issues which preoccupied me when I was National Activities Organiser of the National Front. And they continued to do so for a long time afterwards. We're on Lewisham at the moment, and it seems to me very interesting that Lewisham is a bit of a touchstone for the left, because they frequently say, and they say in the caption to this exhibition about the Reds' opposition to the National Front anti-mugging march in Lewisham in August 1977, they try to say that they're obsessed by it, and they feel the need every time to try and declare a victory. But they had no victory then, because we did march. We were, as Commander Helm says in the article, there were two lawful marches on that day. The Al Karaf march, which ended at Clifton Rise, And after that march ended at Clifton Rise, the assembly then really became an unlawful riot. But the march up to Clifton Rise by Al-Qaraf was lawful, and the National Front March was lawful.
Yep. Yep.
But the left have got Lewisham. They've got it. It's like a bee buzzing in their brain. Only 2, maybe 3 years ago, the BBC did a sequence of programs on BBC Radio 4 and also on the 3rd programme about matters relating to and centred on the so-called Battle of Lewisham. One of the contributors to it was a Negro professor from the college just next door to me here. And they are obsessed by it because it was the last occasion that I can see where the police as a whole stood up to the left, not against the left, but stood against the left's attempt to dictate the terms in which people could express themselves on the streets of London.
Excellent, yeah.
And it is therefore, if the Reds regard Lewisham as a very important issue, and it prompts them and their friends in the BBC to make mendacious programmes about it. I remember before this programme was announced, getting emails from people who I'd never heard of, pretending to be National Front members of yesteryear, asking me about this, that and the other thing. And I said, oh yes, who are you? What's your background? What branch do you belong to? Let's have a little bit. And they sent me some gobbledygook. And then I went to email them back again. And it all went ping. The account, it was a Yahoo account, I think, suddenly cleared. A silly, clever dick, lefty student's attempt to try and con Martin Webster into giving them information about subjects they were interested in without him knowing that it was Reds who were trying to pick his. And I've still got the correspondence, and I'll let you have that. But it shows the subversive and devious approach. Now, if they were interested, these people, these university professors at this so-called University of Roehampton next door to me here, were seriously interested in an academic and objective analysis or collection of information about the Battle of Lewisham, the simplest thing to do is to send me an email or write to me and say, we'd like to discuss with you or interview you about this subject. But no. They have to go the devious way. And it shows that if they do that, if they make those sort of approaches, and as I say, I've got this correspondence with this non-person, now a non-account, email account, if they need to resort to those kind of tactics, then it shows that their entire approach to the subject is mendacious. They are out to lie, to cheat, to deceive, to manipulate. Now, these are not reputable academic approaches by a responsible researcher at a university. And it won't surprise you to learn that in the company of Philip Geoghegan, we launched individual complaints about each one of those programmes. 3 of the 4 programmes broadcast on BBC Radio 4 and the programme broadcast on BBC Radio 3. None of those, even though they were dealing with events, in particular Lewisham, which I was responsible for organising,
Yep.
and through the media they knew quite well that I could be contacted. The BBC allowed that programme to be made without any resort to me or any other National Front person whatsoever, relying solely on accounts from our opponents. And when we wrote to the BBC to complain about this bias, they simply refused to entertain us. They refused to reply to us. They spewed out complaint reference numbers by the score. Every time we wrote to them was another complaint number. And then when we finally resorted to the so-called executive complaints unit of the BBC, we just got the brush off. They were just not prepared to deal with us. We then tried to resort to the Ofcom.
Oh, yeah.
We got an acknowledgement of receipt, but no follow-up. We sent them all the material, all the press cuttings by newspapers such as the Sunday Telegraph, the Sunday Times, the Jewish Chronicle even,
Really?
which
God.
put paid to all the lies that had been rehearsed in these BBC programmes. And we just haven't had a reply from Ofcom on what their attitude is. We've got the power, we're on the inside. Unless you people have got money to take us to the High Court to enforce the laws which regulate our activities, then we're just going to ignore you.
Yeah.
And this is a wicked abuse of democracy and a wicked oppression. Saturday, 11th May 2024. To Mr. Tim Orchard, Chief Executive Officer, and Paula Vanells, CBE, Chairman, Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust, The Bays, South Wharf Road, St Mary's Hospital, London, W2 1NY. Dear Sir and Madam, as I have described herein, yours faithfully, Martin Webster, National Activities Organiser, National Front, 1969 to 1983. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Front View. If you have, please subscribe. In future episodes, we'll not only bring you new stories, but we'll update you as to the progress we were making in our battle against the authorities. Thanks very much.